Welcome back, and we're actually going to start the session with a few words from Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Over to you, Jonathan.
Here I am again. Next session here. No, just a few words. People ask me afterwards just about my mother and father, and to say that they do have autobiographies in perfect timing. That's my father's book. I think it's out of print right now. I think you can get it on Amazon still, but this is still in print. Flight into Freedom and Beyond. That's my mother's autobiography.
What is it called again?
Flight into Freedom and Beyond.
Yeah.
And a person came up to me and said, "Oh, if there was one book of my mother's to get, what would it be?" It's this one here. This is actually her copy of it. It's called Opening Doors Within.
Yeah.
And it is just her guidance put into for every day of the year. And what I thought we'd start this session by just reading today's guidance.
Excellent.
It's August the 30th. August the 30th. And just, do you sometimes wonder why you are where you are, doing what you are doing? Do you ever have doubts in your mind? Seek deep within your heart and answer these questions honestly. Then, if you feel you're still one of those doubting Thomases, take time to be still, to seek enlightenment from within, and find out where you fit in the whole vast scheme. I can assure you that it is not by chance that you are where you are. Life may have been very tough for you. You may have had to go through many tests and trials. You may even have been plunged into the fiery furnace. You may be sure there is a reason for all of it, so that all the dross might be burnt away and nothing but the pure gold, the I am within, remains, so that I can work in and through the I am to bring about my wonders and glories for all to see.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, before I introduce Dennis, I just want to mention another thing. We heard about Eileen's meditations, and it's hard to believe in the early 60s that three people in a little trailer park, as Americans would call it, that it would become a center of light, and then it would become part of a planetary network of light. But actually, this is not so far-fetched these days. Something I've been involved with for over 30 years is the annual gathering of holistic centers. We meet once a year. And you've already met her when you registered, but I wanted to mention Christine Lyons, who's sitting right there, who's close to Jonathan. And I met Christine in Hawaii and played a role in her own journey in coming here. And now she's the coordinator of the annual gathering of holistic centers. So you think back in 62, how many centers of consciousness were there around the planet? There was Esalen, started the same year in Big Sur in 62, and that was about it.
Yeah.
Apart from the older generation, whereas now we have all kinds. We have the Open Center in New York, we have Omega, we have Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon, and on, all over the world. So we really do see that happening. So I wanted to thank Christine for everything she does at the heart of it there in coordinating the ongoing connection between all these centers, because we are really all part of an emerging ecology of consciousness, as I like to call it. So if any of you would like to talk about, we've had the next one coming up, will be coming up mostly at Omega, but they're going to come down to New York and have a day at the Open Center and a visit to the UN too in May, isn't it? Yes, in this coming May. So another thing that is actually coming into actuality, and it seemed very, very far-fetched back in 1962. Okay, so it's my pleasure now to introduce my old pal Dennis Evanson. Dennis and I were here at Clooney Hill, actually, way back when, in the 70s at the same time. Dennis stayed a bit longer than I did. but then he came over to New York and worked at the Open Center too. In the 80s, he's done many things with his life. He's a real scholar, having spent time at Oxford and Harvard and so on. He also was the director of education at the Long Island School of Music and Art. He's returned to his native Colorado. He now lives in Boulder, so he's come all the way from Colorado to be with us. He and I are both fans of Rudolf Steiner. We've had long raps into the night when he was living in New York. Nothing like a pint and a conversation about Rudolf Steiner until after midnight. So, but Dennis, in addition to those things, has really explored, as has Keith, the archives, worked, as I was saying, worked with both Peter and Dorothy, right? And on their memoirs and on the archival material. He actually knows stuff about, that's a good word for it. He knows things about some of the spiritual and esoteric origins of Findhorn and some of the background of the founders that few, if any, other people know. So it's very nice that he's going to talk to us again in Iona. But let's welcome Dennis Evanson.
This has been such a magical mystery tour already starting. We'll continue at Iona, but I've had the deepest conversations with friends that I've ever had. I've been back at every reunion Findhorn's had. And it's just been magical, the connections and the depths. Last night I did an hour and a half. I had done the White Tara initiation with the Dalai Lama when I did the Kala Chakra, 12 days with the Dalai Lama. And it's a longevity empowerment, which I'm looking forward to. Because I've got so many unfinished symphonies I want to get out. And I did it with two friends who took refuge, Marion and her David Steele. And it was just magical, and it goes on after our journeys yesterday to all the wonderful Randolph's Leap and the PowerPoint and Clooney and everything. So I'm going to continue with Jonathan's beautiful invocation of Eileen's guidance, just that we do a little meditative to prepare ourselves, because you've got images in your minds now of these beings. You've heard the voices of Rock and Sir George, and you have some images appear. Some of you have read the original books, and I hope to inspire you to, after this journey, to pick up the Findhorn Garden book or the Faces of Findhorn, because you've got such an insight of being here at Findhorn and hearing from Jonathan and seeing these images and such, that it'll be so inspiring to you in a way that no one else would have access to. You've really got doors open into that treasure trove. And I can't possibly touch all the regular stories. I'd love to, for posterity, just add these other things on, but I'm going to be lemniscating through many anecdotal things of my experiences of these wonderful beings. So I told Jonathan, I hope I do honor to his mother and father, who I love so much. So let's connect with your own guides and guardians in your own lineage, and from your heart, connect with the new friends that you're meeting here at Findhorn and in this marvelous journey together. Because we want to connect our hearts and open that to one another and feel it widening and warming. And if loved ones come into your mind, link with them so we can just extend this circle of light that we're forming here this week. Every Sunday I spend an hour linking with my friends in the postmortem worlds. And I'm so happy I've done this now, because the major part of it are these friends of Findhorn, and I want to invoke their presences and ask that their angels connect with our angels and high-five their wings to one another, and that their higher selves connect with our higher selves and overlight this gathering here and speak between the lines of what I'm able to share. So we honor and invoke the presence of Peter Caddy and Eileen Caddy. I'm going to name some names you may not know that I was linked with. It would be a wonderful blessing for us here, but some will know them. Sarah Marriott, Joni Hartwell Beavis, Ross Stewart, Tom Welch, Nick Rose, Jeremy Slocum, Treya Killam, Elizabeth Earle, Bruce Fischel, Rock and Sir George. We ask the blessings of Sheena Govan and Libby Pugh. And we invoke and invite the presence of the angel of Findhorn, the angel of the Lorians, limitless love and truth in the region of the New Age. We ask the overriding protection of Michael today and on our journey to Iona. And we ask the blessings of the divine Isis Sophia, the divine feminine, and of the Christ. May your sheltering powers overlight us and bless us in this gathering. May the words of my heart and the meditations of my mind be acceptable in thy sight, beloved. May goodwill pour into my thoughts and my words from a right stream and in a living source to honor this community of yours, beloved. Thank you. I was just in St. Germain's meditation room, so maybe I'll start with that. I'm going to weave in a few of my own personal experiences of what Findhorn meant to me. And I went into Saint Germain's room the first time I was here at Findhorn. And there was a picture that now is at Craig's evidently, but there was a picture of Saint Germain, and I sat in Wesley Tudor Pole's chair, which I sat today, who was this wonderful man who did Glastonbury, Chalice Well House, one of the great spiritual leaders of Britain, who, along with Walter Johannes Stein and Ronald Heaver, and Sir George might have had a bit to do in that, I believe. But Churchill calls them my court astrologers, and honors them with helping him to, without their help we wouldn't have defeated Hitler. They were his occult advisors trying to counterattack, what Hitler would be doing. And I was sitting down in Tudor Pole's chair, and all of a sudden I found myself in front of this picture of Saint Germain. And it was changing its visage. It was just changing, like I was tripping or something, and I was seeing all of its incarnations or whatever. And I thought, well, this is just a light show. Get back in the silence, and go and sit down again. And I did. And I found myself in front of the picture again. I looked to see if my body, I was astral projecting on my body. And no, my body wasn't there. I was in front of it, and it was changing like mad. So I went and stayed in the silence, walked into the library, which is next door, and like lines of force of a painting. I was drawn to this history section. I was a grad student at Oxford at the time and interested in esoterics and their philosophy and their religion books. What Findhorn have there? And I said, I'm not interested in history. And there was something of Rakoczy, Count Rakoczy. And I thought, I'm not interested in some Eastern European count. And I opened it, and the page it opened to said Count Rakoczy was a reincarnation of Christian Rosenkreuz, was a previous incarnation of Saint Germain, who was the overlighting master of Findhorn. And so then, like the lines of force in the painting, I went to another book that wasn't even, had a backing on, and opened it, and opened this manuscript, and it was Peter and David talking about that very same painting to the community, because it had been imbued with Saint Germain's energies, and it was in the main lodge of the Rosicrucians. And this is one of the things that Ralph and I talked about really getting across to Findhorn, that Peter was a Rosicrucian, and he very much felt that this community was built on Rosicrucian principles. And he gave me his Rosicrucian manuscripts, and I Xeroxed a copy, so Jeremy and I had a copy of it. And I've just treasured them and reread them year after year after year, and it's all in Rudolf Steiner and more, and there's no contradictions. And Peter's teacher in the Rosicrucian order, and he was inducted in at about 69, usually early, but his teacher, Aureolus, was a spiritual name, like Eileen's was Elixir and Dorothy's was Divina. And by the way, I just saw Dorothy outside and had the most wonderful thing, and she had glimpses of remembering, because I'd ghosted her life story. Not really ghosted it, I'd write her 30-page letters because she wanted to do everything herself, you know, as a human being. And I'd say, you're so lyrical when you tune into the devas. You know, she was worried about the writing. And just tune in. No, this has to be through Dorothy, not my help from the spiritual worlds. And so it was lovely to make that connection, and then make a connection with Jonathan, because there's something I wanted to clear with him or I wouldn't have broached in the least. And that was, I love it when plans come together and things are in perfect timing. So Grace Cook of White Eagle Lodge fame, Peter's parents used to go to Grace when she channeled White Eagle. And Peter asked her, she said, anyone have any questions of White Eagle? And Peter said, yes, I do. I'm in a boxing match at my prep school, and I want to know how to win. And White Eagle said, look at his eyes, he'll telegraph his punches. And Peter said, I just beat the crap out of that guy. Peter was always very practical, and but an amazing connection there. And Aureolus was evidently, he was a walk-in of Saint-Germain, according to Peter. Colonel Sullivan in the First World War, this being overlighted him. And Peter showed me all of his, you know, he was a dramatist and a Shakespearean actor and such, and wrote all of these things that we think had a cipher manuscript to it. But he said the Bacon's cipher manuscript was in their order, and it was hidden during the war so it wouldn't get bombed and everything. And we tried to find it, but they built council houses over it because we wanted to retrieve that. But what Peter said to me was that in their lodge, he was given this painting that was imbued with Saint-Germain's energies. And in their lodge, they had the list of all of the Rosicrucian masters from Christian Rosenkreuz on. And the one before Aureolus was Rudolf Steiner. So Peter was really open to, you know, he honored my love of Steiner, and I was sort of the Steiner expert in our day. We had a lot of Alice Bailey input and such, and Theosophical, but, and when I came to New York, I remember Ralph saying, he'd been head of Omega Institute, and saying, Dennis, I can't read any of this New Age crap anymore. You know, it just bores the hell out of me. But you know what gives wings to my soul and makes me soar spiritually? Is reading your man, The Rude, Rudolf Steiner. So we got together every Wednesday. We were in town and just shared about our love for Steiner. And I had to wait, because you're not supposed to talk about anything you receive occultly for 6 months. So it always killed me. There were things I wanted to say and never could say. And but we just shared our love for Steiner and talked about what's happening in the world and the direction. You know, Ralph just steered the Open Center through all the shoals and everything of all these years. And I want to acknowledge that. So, Network of Light. Most of you know who've read the original stories. Peter and Eileen and Dorothy, after getting Jonathan and the lads to bed, would for 3 or 4 hours meditate and telepathically connect with this network of light. And one of the groups was just called X7. They didn't have a name really. They were Jews who were put into a salt mine in Siberia. And much to their surprise, the Master Jesus came to these Jews and taught them color healing. And they telepathically connected with Naomi, who was the head of the Network of Light as a human being, who came as one of the first people with Eileen and Dorothy and Peter. You know, Lena was here, and Naomi was a central person. She was a direct disciple of Joao Kuhl, the Tibetan master. And they would link up with all these groups. And she did this book that's still available in maybe called X7 Reporting or something. And it's about marvelous color healing. And Sir George had a copy of it and gave it to somebody who published it on their own, and we had to fight to get it back when I was editor-in-chief of Findhorn. And so we published it to get it out in proper circles and such. But that's one example of the Network of Light. And one thing I mentioned when Jonathan and his brother Christopher did the wonderful presentation on Friday that you got a recapitulation of today, a couple of us only had a chance to just give a few minutes of what it meant to us, but Eileen invited me to come. She and I and Helen Rubin would do Network of Light linkings at times at 6:30 in the morning. And I thought, I'm out of my element here. This is way beyond my pay grade, and I was mortified if I had to go first. Because if I was last, or second at least, I thought, oh, well, I got that one and that one and that one. Because we'd just tune in and we'd be told, hold light in Belfast, such and such a thing is going on. And pray for this event and that. And at times they wouldn't mention it and I think, oh my God, I'm off, because I had no inner druidic radar like I do have in my math physics work. I know when things are going to be right. And I don't have that in my own life or, in these levels, unfortunately. But I might say, oh, I got a visa. And they say, oh, we forgot. Yeah, we got a visa too. Thank God. And Eileen, like you can talk about your dinner with Andre, but I had breakfast with Eileen. And Eileen would invite me to breakfast. And we just, like Peter and I would always talk esoterics and things, but Eileen was she's just a divine mother. I would just bask, I would marinate myself in her energy, in her Marian energies. And whenever I had breakfast with Eileen, I'd go to pubs and everybody would just say, oh my God, you're translucent, you're ecstatic, you're glowing. You must have had breakfast with Eileen. And one anecdote of Eileen's, because we saw Drum Doing yesterday. It was up for sale for something like £1 million or £1.25 million or something, and Eileen got in guidance that she gave to the core group were to offer £85,000 and not a cent more. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And she announced this to an international conference in October that we had. I thought, wow, that's big, because if this doesn't come true, it's, egg on our face. And local hoodlums had broken with sledgehammers through the walls to get out the copper piping to sell for drugs and such, and they'd made fires and put some Nazi signs up and stuff inside. And so it was assayed for £85,000 exactly. And so we were able to purchase it and then offer it to the Waldorf School and, etc. So it goes. The universal link. And Keith has something. Do you want to do this at the beginning? You give a tenor for it? So. Okay. Keith has got. Keith, I just want to honor. I was the archivist in my day, and Keith has been doing a marvelous job of keeping these treasures alive for the world and everything as archivist. And Ralph invited me to speak at the Lampeter at the World Congress, the Congress of the Holy Grail in Wales, and there's where Keith and I met and became lifelong friends.
Thank you, Dennis. We've heard the name Libby Pugh a number of times, and I wanted to give you a little bit more information about who she was, and in particular, how the Universal Link began. Libby was a psychic researcher, and in the mid-50s, I think maybe 57, had a book published called Nothing Else Matters. I managed eventually to track down a copy, and when I came to read it, it read like it was Eileen. Eileen and Libby didn't meet, I think, until, or certainly Peter met Libby in 65, and through the last year, because that was the last year of Libby's life, she died on December 6, 1966. Yeah. And in that time, she and Eileen became very close friends, and it's clear that Libby was very supportive of Eileen as she was working through her guidance. But I want to tell you about the beginning of the Universal Link, which was the organization Libby started and moved up to
St. Anne's.
St. Anne's,
The White House.
yeah, the White House in Georgia Square. But there's
Near Blackpool.
What's the rest of that? Lytham St. Anne's. Thank you. Yeah, Lytham St. Anne's. The Universal Link was basically formed by Libby working in collaboration with a man called Richard Grave. And I'll read you this extract of an extraordinary thing that happened. April the 11th, 1961, Richard Grave bought a house and was clearing out the garage, taking an old picture down. And this is, I think, a newspaper report. As he was carrying it under his right arm to throw it away, he was aware of a figure standing in front of him and blocking his way. The figure spoke and said, "I am he," and reached out his left hand and touched the picture. Immediately, the glass of the picture shivered into bits, and the figure disappeared in a blaze of orange light. So strong was this light that Mr. Grave put up his left arm to shield his eyes, and the forearm was immediately burned. He was at first greatly upset and found a guest who was staying in the house, a retired schoolmistress, and told her what had occurred. They placed some lint on the burn, and after Mr. Grave had set the picture on a side table. About a half an hour after this, Mrs. Grave came in after a visit to the hairdresser, and they all examined the picture and saw that it was dark and blistered and only fit to be thrown away. When Mrs. Grave heard the story fully, and they were all looking at the grimed old picture, Mr. Grave began to think it was all an hallucination, and that the glare of light had been some kind of strange electrical fault, gathering strength from some atmospheric condition. They all began to laugh heartily at his fright, and his wife put the picture down on the floor, leaning it against her washing machine. About an hour later, Mrs. Grave looked at the picture again and called out to her husband. She said, "My God, look at the picture." When he looked, he saw it was perfectly restored and of a clear colour, and the blisters were smoothed out. The picture on examination turned out to be the angels announcing the coming of Christ to the shepherds, and was entitled "The First Christmas Morn." A couple of other short extracts to give you a fuller picture of this. Later, the following day, Mr. Grave had occasion to go into the conservatory where the picture was lying face upwards on the top of a trunk. And as he opened the door, he saw, hovering above the picture, the same figure who had the day before appeared in the passageway. Quite simply, Mr. Grave was terrified. He slammed the door and ran and found his wife and brought her to the conservatory. The figure was still there, but only visible to Mr. Grave. His wife saw nothing but the restored picture lying on the trunk. On Friday, April the 14th, Mrs. Grave noticed a wet patch on the floor where the picture stood and pointed this out to her husband. He concluded that some dampness must have got into it from being stored in the outhouse, and he took it to the lounge fire to dry it thoroughly. Then it was noticed that the water continued to appear on the picture, and that it was coming from the face of the foremost of the group of angels. This flow of water continued in spite of the fact that the picture had been placed for some hours in front of the fire and was still standing there. And it goes on. These extracts are all in the online archive library, a long piece that I've written on many of the characters that we've heard about: Bruce McManaway, Richardson, Barb Baker, and others. They gathered buckets of water from this. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. And Libby, as I say, as a psychic investigator, went to explore, was this for real? And from that formed a connection with Richard, taking notes on the transmissions that he got from someone who they came to call the All-Knowing One.
The AKO.
The AKO, indeed. Yeah, I think that's probably
That's a
enough
perfect
for now.
segue. When I was working with Peter on his life story, he had he salvaged some of the archives, and he had things that weren't in the archives that were piles about this high of the guidance that Naomi and Dorothy and Eileen wrote down every day from the masters and such. And Peter opened up everything to me to read. He was just very selfless, and like everything is fair game, and there was this correspondence between Libby and Eileen. And Eileen's best friend, Joni Hartwell, is it?
Hartnell.
Hartnell.
Yeah.
Okay, good. She was taking care of Libby. Libby was dying of cancer, and just there were suppurating just sores all over her. And Libby would change the dressings every day. Joni would change the dressings every day on her and just really looked after her. And she was always so positive. There's another manuscript that I read that was in the archives at one point that I've Xeroxed somewhere in my storage. And she was just unerringly positive. Like Peter to the max, what he learned from Aureolus and his soul science. And so she's telling Eileen, Eileen's tuning into her and feeling the pain and suffering. She's saying, don't. I'm above that. I'm just blissful, And the one letter said, the AKO, the all-knowing one, appeared to me for an hour and a half today. I now know everything. I will leave this plane on December 6, 1966. And this was in January of 66 or so this letter came. And so these members of the Universal Link wanted to have a propinquity meeting, and tons of people tried to get there to be with Libby when she died. And many did, and some didn't. And but they were in their guidance, they were told, well, Richard Graves was getting transmissions from Limitless Love and Truth, the being that announced itself as Limitless Love and Truth, which David did. And if I can recommend anything that's of Findhorn's deep and esoterically deep and talks about what's still going on the planet, it's Revelation, the Birth of a New Age by David Spangler, and it's been long out of print. We should have never, when I was at the head of the publishing house, I would have never let it get out of print because that was just the most important one, I think, ever written, through David here. But there'd been some political stuff with Richard Graves feeling this is my property in a sense, and David opened it up by channeling this, transmissions from this being. And I used to do week-long workshops. It was the most powerful workshop we ever did here, with Terry Killam, Treya Killam, Ken Wilber's wife. And
Revelations at the birth of the
Revelations, semicolon, the birth of a new age, by David Spangler. So Anthony Brooke was an extraordinary part of the Universal Link. Anthony Brooke was the king of Sarawak, this huge Indonesian island. And he freed the people, he made it a democracy. He stepped down from being a monarch and freed his people and went around at walkabout. And he used to come with his partner, Monica Parrish, here. And they got into Sun Myung Moon on, happily Peter didn't, or Eileen, or Dorothy, or anybody. But they became real aficionados of Sun Myung Moon. Libby didn't either. But Libby, you couldn't tell if she was male or female, Tibetan or Caucasian. She was this amazing looking woman. And she was like the doyenne of British spiritualists. Everybody would report to her. So I'll tell you briefly about this unpremeditated journey that Peter and Rock went on with a Rosicrucian clairvoyant named Kathleen Sparks. And Eileen and Naomi and Lena and Dorothy were here, linking with them and everything. But anyway, this woman came and said, we're going to have contact with Saint-Germain, and we need to get Rock. And because we're to go on an unpremeditated journey. And so Peter and Kathleen Sparks drove down to Rock's place, and when Rock came to the door, Saint-Germain was so overlighting him that he looked like, Saint-Germain. And Rock's clairvoyance didn't open until he was 60, so there's hope for many of us. And Rock was in the Theosophical Society of Edinburgh, sitting there, and someone was talking about Saint-Germain. And this being appeared on the stage in this medieval regalia, and whenever the name Saint-Germain was mentioned, this being would bow to Rock and go. And that was Rock's first before he met Kermos and Pan, etc. And I'm going to have to lemniscate all over the place because there's no way. Everything links to everything else. And so bear with me. When you read the Findhorn things, you can, and the wonderful stuff that Keith's going to provide us with, you'll have a treasure trove of Findhorn memorabilia and the history there, and you can fit these things together. But Saint-Germain, well, part of Findhorn is a mystery school, and some of us were aware of this in the Alice Bailey teachings through Joao Kuhl, which came in the 20s, or basically after Steiner died, there was this new influx of teachings from the East, from this Tibetan master Joao Kuhl through Alice Bailey. And in the Reappearance of the Christ, it says, the first elementary mystery school will be formed on earth in the last third of this century. It will be built on sand. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides. It will be either in Wales, which is our alternative center for technology, our friends that are a cousin community, or in Scotland. And so certain people made their way on the basis of that, figuring this, and I did too. And I thought I wanted a mystery school, where David Spangler would give transmissions from the Maitreya Bodhisattva and from the Master Jesus and Saint-Germain, and he did at times, it was private. We didn't put it out to the world because David didn't want any glamour. And they're beautiful transmissions you can still get in the study papers. They're just so wise and so helpful. But he didn't want glamour surrounding him about, having transmissions from the masters. But Saint-Germain gave marching orders to Peter through Rock, and they used to meet in the garages with 3 chairs, Peter and Rock and an empty one that wasn't empty, but Rock could see and Peter couldn't. And Peter told me about one time that Rock said, Peter, Saint-Germain says you must do, you need to do such and such. And Peter said, tell him I won't. That goes against my Rosicrucian teachings. I will not go against the ethics of my Rosicrucian teachings. And Rock just goes, thank God, because this was a test. And if you would have followed out by authority, what I'm telling you through Saint-Germain, you have to be in your own sovereignty and your own, free will. And so Peter passed the test with flying colors. Peter, by the way, was at 24, 25 or something, he was in charge of all the catering of the Burma campaign. These are the Gurkhas, New Zealand, Australia, everybody fighting against the Japanese in the East. And he said, I never heard of shot fired in anger. And something I just remember that I didn't jot down that I'll try to get to. This is a wonderful story, typically Peter. So he'd go off and he'd meet gurus and stuff, He'd say, I have to be on the front lines so I can see. It's one thing to plan the meals back here and make sure they're nutritious and everything. But I've got to make sure it gets to the front and it's, not adulterated or anything. Quite right, Catty. So he'd go off and, and he said, I was always in search of spiritual leaders, etc. So he decides, he goes to at the end of the partition of after the Second World War in India, partitions going on with Bangladesh, and he says, I want to take men on a hiking trip instead of them going off for R&R to the flesh pots of Southern Asia. I want to take them hiking in the Himalayas. Quite right, Catty, very well. And so he says he gets this train together and partitions going on. He's got 50 Indian guys. People are throwing hand grenades, shooting machine guns at the train. He said this is a special secret mission for the British Army. So he gets all these Indian troops, protecting the thing. And there's he's in a war zone going through. And it was only so that he could meet the lamas. And Peter, young husband, had been around the First World War, had been the first white man into Tibet, because they had things about when the white man comes, And so it was not allowed to have Caucasians come in. Ralph's, in his journey, snuck across illicitly, and you can read that in his wonderful autobiography. he wanted to have an adventure when he went up on his 40th, and he certainly did. And anyway, there was this movie about 7 years in Tibet of this guy that was in the concentration camp who accidentally made it, but Peter consciously did. And he said, we're riding these mules, and all of a sudden there was these Tibetan horns that he heard in the distance. The mule's ears picked up, and Peter said, I had these like steel reins and such, and you know, I'm a firm man, and I couldn't control it. And it went running off to the monastery. And legend has it that the Dalai Lama was following these footprints. He had some clairvoyance. They followed the journey that Peter had made when they were getting out, and they went off the road to go to this monastery because Peter had gone off the road to that monastery and met these lamas. And that's when the Chinese troops came through and would have got the Dalai Lama. The magic of Findhorn.
That's amazing.
And I wanted, there's a book that Lorien Press put out that by Rock's main disciple. Rock was going to give his library to us here, and this guy grabbed it and such. And he's got a book, and it's wonderful to finally get it out because Helen Rubin was going to do that. We never had a book of the life story of Rock, but it's glamorous. And I want to say a little bit about Christian Rosenkreutz and Saint-Germain because this guy claims that Rock was Saint-Germain and that Peter was Saint-Germain too. And Peter would never say that. You know, and I don't believe Rock would have either, because who's Saint-Germain? Rudolf Steiner says there was this incredible initiate, Christian Rosenkreutz, who had been John the Beloved. He had been Lazarus and had this first resurrection, you know, first initiation, Christ initiation, to become Lazarus John. He was the sister of, or brother of Mary and Margaret, Mary Magdalene. And in occult lore, Mary Magdalene, John was Cain, and Mary Magdalene was Abel. And then John was Hiram, the great builder of the Temple of Jerusalem. And John, and then Saint-Germain, Count Ragazzi, but he was Christian Rosenkreutz before, and this tale of Christian Rosenkreutz is little known in the community. We know about Saint-Germain, but there was this individuality after John, you know, after his initiation by the Christ as John Lazarus. Steiner says that the 7 rishis, who were the 7 teachers of Atlantis, of all the planetary and solar oracles, they were the great teachers of Atlantis, reincarnated as the 7 rishis, which gave us the marvelous Upanishads and the Vedas. And they were the heads of, there was like a Jupiter oracle and a Mars oracle and the Sun oracle, etc. And that they reincarnated in the 13th century and were around this special child. And they all imbued everything they knew to this child, like, you know, telepathically and on the inner planes. And Steiner said this child was sickly, but almost translucent. And it had the 7 rishis that it had Zoroaster, who was the head of the Persian ancient cultural epoch. And there was a representative of each of the cultural epochs, including the present one. And these 12 beings surrounded this child and just imbued everything, and then he'd go into the spiritual worlds and like reconfigure it, you know, and recontextualize it. And he dies as fairly young after they imbue him with this, and then he comes back as Christian Rosenkreutz, and he goes all over the world to mystery centers reawakening this knowledge. And he blended alchemy and Gnosticism and Hermeticism and white magic with Buddhism and Sufism and Hinduism, and made this amalgam for the West. And as one of the 2 teachers, Rudolf Steiner says there's always 7 masters in incarnation physically at any time on earth, out of the great ones. And Master Jesus in his time, Jesus and Christian Rosenkreutz always in the West, and Maitreya Bodhisattva, the head of the hierarchy. So we're not being Christianly imperialistic here. The Maitreya Bodhisattva is the head of the Master Jesus in this mythos. And with Kuthumi and Moria, who formed the Theosophical Society in the East. And But anyway, this being is such an exalted being, you know, Christian Rosenkreuz, that, and David says, and Peter always said that, you know, Rock was a reincarnation of Merlin, and it makes sense because he was really a Gandalf figure, and I've got a wonderful tale. We were on an exchange, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Ralph, we'll see, but Keith won't know it necessarily. I'm glad to be able to say something that you don't know. We were meeting with a group of Subuds somewhere in Scotland. And I understood that it was near where Rock had taught two people that were he was teaching them healing and everything. He had two disciples. And so I told Lucinda, my girlfriend at the time, that my secret thing is I'm just going to wander in the woods. I want to find Rock's place and find these two women and find out who Rock was as a human being. What was his sense of humor, you know? I wanted to find people who really knew him for years and just get more of a sense of him as a human being. And so I walk out that morning after the meditation in the woods, and these two women come down this path and say, Dennis, Rock sent us. You want to find out about his sense of humor, don't you? And this one woman I just fell in love with. I was about 30ish and she was 50ish. She was this elegant British upper class woman, and we just walked, you know, and talked all afternoon long. And she told me this story that Rock, because he had a bad heart, and she was clairvoyant, and when they walked up, he went up to this hill every day, and that the little nature spirits would pull him and push him and tug on his clothes and such, and she had a sense that he wanted to be alone. And so she went down below and let him go up to the top alone, and she looked back and she said he was in his Merlin aspect, with his long hair and robes and his staff. And so that night at dinner he said, did you notice anything today on the mountaintop? And she said, yes, I saw you in your Merlin aspect. What was that all about? And he said, today the powers of the Christ became one with the ancient magical wisdom. And she said, what will happen now? And Rock said, I don't know. Anything can happen. And they said that when she died, oh, here's a wonderful anecdote. There was a shamaness from Brazil or somewhere in South America who was very queenly, and these Scottish women didn't like her because she wouldn't muck in and do the dishes or cook or anything. She was, you know, upper class and used to being served. And when Rock was dying, she was there, and she put on this Minnie Mouse apron and was helping with the dishes. And she walked in with this Minnie Mouse apron, and Rock just saw it, and he raised himself out of bed and was pointing and just laughing and howling and laughing, and he died laughing. And they said that night, like a blizzard happened. It was in May or something, I don't remember the exact date, but there was winds around and fairy lights all night long swirling around the house, and that's Rock's demise. Forgive a slight personal note, but when we were here, there was a man named Paul Solomon who did this week-long workshop where we would visualize a garden, green, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, 7 gardens going up. And we visualize our own ones, and it was to connect and open the chakras and go up. And at the green one, we were out in the woods, etc., and there'd be a horse running towards us, and we'd recognize ourselves on it, but it was our higher self, and he would come and swing us up on, or mine did, and I'd merge with my higher self. And then we went to the blue and the purple, and then you go to the top of a mountain, and we'd swallow the sun, and just marinate ourselves in sun energies and be glowing. And for me, there was always a pond that I would dive into to purify myself, because as an entrance to our temple that we were building on the inner planes. And a white lion would always greet me, and a white lamb. And then they walked me to my temple, and the white lion would stand outside as guardian. And I never thought anything of it, but Rock's tutelary ally was a white lion, Numa. And when Helen Rubin, who's a clairvoyant, and I and Peter, we used to meditate at 9 o'clock. Helen lived with him for 6 months, and I did for 4 months, writing his first draft of his life story. in perfect timing. Jeremy did this final draft. And I'm only by grace am I given, clairvoyance, seeing beings and getting to talk to beings, etc. It's happened maybe 70, 80, 90 times in my life, once every couple times a year, 2 or 3 times a year occasionally. But I feel energies, and there was this energy that would come, and Helen Rubin just said, Numa's putting his head in your lap all the time. Rock's White Lion is putting his head in your lap. And I was, okay by me. I'm honored. And I've been, and I want to commend to you, linking with people who've been important to you. Like I saw my picture of my teacher, Pir Vilayat Khan, yesterday with Sir George. And without his beard, I'd never seen him without his beard. And we can link with these beings, and they will overlight us, and just their sheltering power will protect us. And we just need to consciously connect. So I spend an hour every Sunday doing that with all my old teachers and Christian community elders, and especially the Findhorn people that I invoke today. And some of them are here, their energies are here overlighting us and blessing us, and we'll be along our journey. Peter was just a will initiate. It was such a privilege living with him, Jonathan. He was just so positive. He loved life so much. He was so much in life with his then wife and his then life. He was just a delight to be with. He just cooked with gusto and ate with gusto and conversed with gusto, and we'd do an hour sunbathing every day. He'd do it naked, and we'd work in the garden together, and it was just a delight. And I remember if I said anything not quite positive enough, like, I'll try to do such and such a thing, Peter, you'd like Yoda would say, no try, do. And one manifestation story, Peter and I did workshops on that. I really got to know him and love him on the West Coast, and I set up TV gigs for us and interviews with newspapers and things. And he really kept Findhorn going by just carrying the torch. And, and we did workshops on manifestation, and I'd never told these stories when I was here at Findhorn, but I've got one manifestation story. When I got back from Oxford, I got a grant. I was part of a group called Hexiad in Karras, and we were linking, we had money to link Findhorn and Oroville and Arcosanti, which is this futuristic city being built out in the Arizona desert by Paulo Solari, a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I worked there for months before coming to Findhorn. And I got there, I had a grant of like $1,000, and I thought that was just expense money, and they were going to pay my $600 I needed to pay to work at Arcosanti for 6 weeks. And when I got there, to my chagrin, because I had Johnny Appleseed, I'd taken a whole thing of peyote buttons across America, turning on all my friends and going into the Sierras, and I had a 6-month thing, and all of a sudden I was there, and I only had a roll of nickels to make phone calls. I had not a cent, and they said you have to buy steel metatarsal guards, steel-toed shoes with steel metatarsal guards, and you need work gloves. We'll provide you with a helmet. And so I walked out in the desert saying, geez, I blew it. I'm supposed to write articles on this, I had this grant, and I don't have the money even for the shoes. And I walked out not knowing what to do in the direction way away from the community. And I have 4A feet. Most guys are triple D, triple E. They're just, and I came across a pair of boots in the desert, brand new, 10.5, 4A, exactly my size. And walking back, I found the left-hand glove, and I was told, you'll find the right-hand glove after breakfast tomorrow. And I did, going up to the site, so I was covered. Peter loved these manifestation stories. So Sheena Govan was Ralph's teacher. And say something about the man named Intrepid.
Well, I actually only learned it through listening to Jonathan this morning that Sheena, who we know was Peter and Eileen and Dorothy's teacher, Peter's second wife. Well, Peter met Dorothy while they were working for British intelligence in New York, now during the Second World War. So I don't know if any of you have read that amazing book, A Man Called Intrepid, about Sir William Stevenson, who was you know, basically the New York counterpart to M in the James Bond things. Well, apparently Sheena, is this correct? Sheena was, Dennis was saying that Sheena was the right-hand man of William Stevens.
Yeah, she was
right-hand
his
woman.
right-hand woman, and was sent to do spy stuff in Central America or South America with Dorothy.
Yeah, so anyway, that's an extraordinary book because, I mean, all the subterfuge, you know, the incredible anti-Nazi espionage that had to be done in the nadir of the Second World War. You know, when the U.S., a lot of it, when the U.S. was still not involved, it was just Britain. So it's an extraordinary thing that the two of them met within that environment. And then the story is that, I think Jonathan confirmed it, that Dorothy met her husband there.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet Dorothy's husband? No. And he was working for British intelligence, and that he introduced her to Sufism.
Yeah, he was a
And it
disciple of
was
Hazariah.
Sufism that then opened her up to the world of the Devas, as I understand it. So, anyway, I recommend that book. It's a totally gripping book if you like real-life espionage and super intense global conditions.
Who's it by?
I don't remember who the author is, but it's called A Man Called
Named
Intrepid,
Intrepid.
and it's a profile of the man who was head of British intelligence in New York in the Second
Precursors
World War.
of the CIA.
Sir William Stevenson.
And David's father, who was supposedly an engineer, was really a CIA operative in Morocco and such, where David was born.
David Spangler.
So there's these interesting connections between the military. And Peter told me, Peter wrote some marvelous things out of his Rosicrucian wisdom to this journal that went to officers. And he said all the high officers were moral men and men of real moral stature. And unlike your military. So one anecdote of Dorothy, when I'm working with Freya Seacrest, who's one of the main Lorien members, which is the name of the group of David Spangler when he left. A number of people went with him. And Dorothy sent me this letter and saying there's a lot of activity. The Davids tell me that the elementals or the fire beings are really working, you know, almost herniating themselves, working because there's a danger of the San Andreas Fault imploding. And so they're trying to shut the energy up north away from San Francisco. And they've decided that the safest place to do it is Mount St. Helens. They're going to blow the other side of Mount St. Helens. That was days before Mount St. Helens went. So it's like Dorothy. And I've got that saved somewhere, that letter, with the post dates and everything, because it documents that, you know, it was pre-Mount St. Helens and not some after this fact story. Peter, there was a young Swedish woman that fell in love with Peter, and it helped open Peter's heart, and he asked David for advice, and David wrote the most tactful, wonderful letters. You know, never saying, my colleagues on the inner plane say, don't do this or something, you know, do the right thing. But just think about this, Peter, and think about that. And Peter always did the right thing. It was just amazing, you know. I mean, he's falsely accused of being a womanizer in ways that he wasn't, to the extent anyway that that some people felt. No, he totally did the right thing in these instances, and this woman came to spend some time with us in Germany, and again, he was very proper. David Spangler, I'm going to tell an experience I had that connects with rock. My second spiritual experience, I had experience of Jesus when I was 11 or 12. And I was a little saint for a while. I really was trying to do good till the dark streets reasserted their dictatorship of the ghetto that I lived in. But when I was at Harvard Divinity School, Harvard Graduate School, in the philosophy department, I went I hiked. I used to go to my best friends in California, and every weekend we'd go into the Sierras or Yosemite or somewhere. We'd backpack in, or else we'd water ski in Lake Palmer. And I was at Yosemite National Park. I was meditating. He was going to get the car. I was meditating, and I felt this presence. about 100 feet behind me or 200 feet, and I looked, and here in this fallen giant sequoia, which I had climbed up through the roots and everything to walk across as a human ant just to see how huge it was, you know. And I just finished that, and I looked, and here was Pan in the root on top of this tree. There was a Pan-like being, about 10 feet tall, and I thought, is this the devil? And I didn't believe in the devil or hell or anything, but I had to investigate this thing because it was just sitting there, and I went up to it, and it stayed totally immobile. And when I got toward it, I thought, I heard as a kid that the devil had red eyes, and this being had these incredible brown eyes. And so I walked up and I thought, if this thing moves or twitches or jumps toward me, could rip me apart, I'm going to have a heart attack before it does anything. And so now I would communicate with it, but I came up to it and I could see every little hair coming out of its pores. It wasn't anybody in the costume, you know, it was like 10 feet tall. And Rock said he had this magnificent face, you know, he wasn't like a satyr or anything sensual in the face. And there was this magnificent face, it was like a Zen monk. The color of his skin was mahogany, you know, about like Dave's shirt. And just these brown eyes and this quizzical look like a Zen master or something, you know, at me. But he didn't move and I didn't dare quite touch him, but I got this close and just could see all these hairs coming out of his face and everything. So that was my directional signal. When I got back from Oxford, I had a friend and we started the first drug rehab center together in the East Coast as Harvard Divinity School students because nobody understood about acid. So I was the first bad trip counselor on the East Coast. And I came back from Oxford and he said, I've been getting telepathic messages. This connects with what Eliza was saying the other night to us. I've been getting telepathic messages from a place called Findhorn. Do you know anything about it? And I said, no. He said, it's a community in Scotland. I said, well, I was at Oxford. You know, I don't know every British cult and community and stuff. But he was really angry I didn't know anything about it. We went to a party and the guy walked right up to us and said, it was turned out to be a party for Paul Hawken who had returned from Findhorn. And so he walked up to us and we went through the door and said, you want to find out about Findhorn, don't you? And I thought, well, because I told Peter, dial back your meditation. You know, he had a nervous breakdown in between when I left from Harvard to go to Oxford. I just thought, you know, I just thought it was his own cod cuckoo land, you know, transmission or something. But we were connected with, we were told that there was a group in Turkey we were to connect with and one in Italy who I later met at Findhorn. The first day I got to Findhorn, the mayor of Turkey was talking to the community about the network of light, and it was the one that we were told to connect with. And there was a group in Illinois that I found out later who it was, but we were doing this. So it was real confirmation. I met the Italian ones, and they had the same thing. They were working with Serapis, and they had the same linkage of us and Findhorn, and they were the ones, the story was a little out of kilter, the version I heard from these is, but they had the head of the secret police, the head of army generals, the mayor of Istanbul. They were really elite people in Turkey. And they had got Findhorn, and they couldn't find Findhorn on any atlas anywhere. And so they didn't know, and one guy saw a Caucasian-looking young man walking on the street, and he had his officers grab him and pull him into his offices. And it was, can't think of the name now. I didn't know him at the time, but anyway, Liza mentioned his name, and they said, do you know anything about Findhorn? He said, how do you know about Findhorn? I just came. Nobody knows about Findhorn. It's this little community in northern Scotland I just came from. So they made the connection, and I happened to be here the first day that they came physically. But they brought Peter and Eileen. Peter loved it because they just went through customs and everything. You know, they were head of the military and the police, and they got a very VIP treatment. Oh, we're doing good. I'll get us off here at 4 o'clock. I want to share one thing that really gives the essence of Findhorn. It's one of my favorite communications that will get you a feel for David. This was a communication from an angelic source in 21st of June, 1970. And you can connect with your guides or your angel or your higher self or anything and just receive this. It's a most inspiring, wonderful thing that really talks about Findhorn. Greetings to you, my beloveds. I am Eloi, and I am a builder. I am grateful for the opportunity to communicate with you. I am not upon your human line of evolution, but I am not one of that you call the nature forces. I stand with the company of others outside your planet. I am not a space being from another planet. My home is within the higher dimensional vibrations of space. I want to communicate to you what we feel about your Earth and your work. My companions and I are among those who dwelt in space and were brought here long ago as companions of the God who has created this solar system. In the Hebrew Bible it says, what we have in English, and God created heaven and earth. The Elohim created heaven and earth. Plural, feminine.
Mm-hmm.
We are builders within his realm. And Steiner says that the Elohim exousiai were the builders of form. Every planet that is formed is in a dynamic state of life and growth, drawing to itself the substances of nourishment and releasing that which it cannot assimilate. Thus, there are those forms and manifestation of energy in creation which are the unused, unintegrated, unresolved, and untransmuted results of the creative process. As in all living systems, until perfection and complete wholeness are achieved, there are in the body of the solar logos, which is the solar system and all its planets on all their levels of being, those forces and energies which correspond to waste material. These must be transmuted and reintegrated into the cycle of life as raw material for future creativity. In the evolutionary movement forward through time, this residue which is left behind must be gathered up and purified, and then returned to its creative cycle. It cannot be allowed to accumulate or to express itself within the evolving body as centers of unintegrated and separate energies existing out of timing and out of place, hence becoming sources of evil, which is just energy out of timing and place. Because it is within your consciousness and in your hands to work on Earth and help your planet in her work, and because you seek to minister to your planet, as do we, I want to convey to you the picture of your world as we see it, so that you may approach her in gentleness and love and in an understanding that will give you power through linking with us as cosmic forms of angelic life. Please understand that for various reasons, Terra was set aside for the special task of being the purifier of your solar system for a period of time. Hence, there were attracted to your world those elements which I have mentioned of unresolved, unintegrated matter, energy, and life to be harnessed into the denser nature of material form. Left in their expanded state, exposed state, these energies had the power to impact harmfully upon the sensitive fabric of the solar being, the solar logos, and upon the other planets and their life forms, being like a toxin within the systems of your own bodies. However, by being encapsulated into dense matter within the body of Terra, their vibrations could be slowed down and shielded from the body of the whole until these energies could be purified and reintegrated harmoniously and in love into the whole. As this was done, the purifiers and redeemers came to earth, as well as those who will yet be purifiers and redeemers in destinies yet unperceived and perhaps undreamed of by you. Terra became a schoolhouse in the experience of confronting and resolving the challenges of primitive creativity and evolution. Your planet became an arena for the interplay of the forces of evolution on many levels and the forces of non-integrated life and energy from many sources, some quite primitive and others more evolved, but all within a sidetrack of evolution that placed these energies outside the communion of the whole. Thus, Earth became analogous to a kidney in the body of the solar system, regulating and transmuting the energies flowing throughout the system, removing impurities and returning to the body of the whole only what is harmonious and integrated with the progressive evolution of the whole. Beings who had become tainted with energies of retrogressive evolution or devolution would come to Terra to be cleansed and reunited with the whole. In this fashion, your planet has performed a tremendous service to all life streams and all planetary systems within the solar family, enabling them to continue their patterns of development with greater ease. No planet or being is asked to perform such a transmutative and sacrificial task endlessly, nor is it allowed to do so. The time must come when it takes up its own pattern of growth, new service, and development. Now Earth seeks and is given her redemption in a vast initiatory process occurring throughout the total body and life of the Solar Father. We who have associated with Earth since her inception now look upon this time as one of beauty without measure, joy without comparison. These forms which still remain within unregenerated aspects of primitive and separative expression will be lovingly removed with respect for their essential divine nature to other areas which have newly taken on the transmutative function. Now a vast work of purification is upon us to cleanse and beautify Earth, as one would beautify and enrobe a bride before her marriage. In this fashion we greet Earth in her time of great joy and accomplishment. This event seeks its expression through your hearts and minds and dedication. Terra will always remain a place of special strength and contribution. Now she must progress with her own evolution more rapidly than she could do if she remained within the service of transmutation. Yet for what she has done, I speak on her behalf. I speak for Earth, one whom we love without ceasing, who is so beautiful to us without a blemish or flaw. Earth, with all her splendor as we see her, she emerged a beautiful goddess from the heart of the Solar Father to take into her own strength the work of gathering in the products of unresolved evolution and giving them a chance to redeem and reintegrate themselves in harmony with the pattern of this system. Without judgment, only with love. For those that will be removed, there is no judgment, only the vision that in the body of the Solar Father and in the body of the Earth, new vibrations must be made manifest with which certain forms of life and energy are no longer compatible. Now from us, from your elder brethren of your race, and from many sources of light on other planets and within your evolution, comes the hope to pour forth upon your world purification, redemption, and cleansing, not destruction, not pain, not scarring. We hope to see Earth lovingly caressed in your light, in your love and in your wisdom, with the negative accumulation of the past moved out. No beings can now enter Earth seeking this redemption. This is only for those who are already part of Terra's evolution through past association. Because of this, you now see a great flood of population incarnating in order to take this opportunity for purification, that they may maintain their link with solar evolution. Otherwise, they must sleep the long sleep to be reawakened in a future time, in a future land. Some of the children of Earth will now be able to be removed, yet they will not be able to take incarnation now and interfere with the cycle that is now dawning, which is for Earth a time of purification, rest, healing, and nourishment after her long time as the servant of transmutation for the Solar Logos. She has also served as a great instructress into primeval forms of creativity, so that each one who has dwelt upon Terra has added to his or her consciousness the vibration of a purifier, a redeemer, a synthesizer. These children who cannot take part in the drama now occurring will sleep to return to Earth at a future date. Your work, as I see it, is in this process of purification, but this does not imply a vision of pain and torment. We would not rend Earth, we would heal her. Because you are strong, you can heal and cleanse without fear, with love, and with the tenderness which we would wish, with strength and firmness of being, but yet with the gentleness of understanding. We have known Earth for a long, long time, indeed since her earliest foundations when she was a being of radiant light. We hail Earth and proclaim her our beloved. We are dedicated to her in every fiber and light of our being. And to you who seek to bring out the force of your light and love to help our beloved planet, we wish to communicate our upholding and our gratitude. Now we are linking with you. Please uplift Earth in the joy, in the laughter, and in the love of the feast of this great celebration. We recognize that you are still within the outworking of this great event, while to us it is already accomplished, but we wish to link in shared vision. We envy you, if you can call it that, for you have been close, closer than we to earth. You will always carry part of her with you. We who are the handmaidens of this being must someday see you go forth. You will be our children to creation. For you have entered the deep mystery of creation and have met the test. There are no words to describe the glory of this as we see it. Therefore we join with you in wordless song, endless praise. Five to four, Ralph. I guess I could take a few questions, and Keith and Ralph, feel free to answer, and Jonathan, or direct questions to any of them too, if there are any questions that people would like to ask. Or maybe we should just absorb that last reading,
Yes.
and I think that's the best. You can ask questions throughout the rest of the week at any time to me.
Okay, well, thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
And so we will meet at 4:30 on the bus out on the runway, and we will head to this lovely medieval abbey, plus Garden Abbey, to hear Vespers. We'll also have time to enjoy the grounds both before and after the chanting.